Welcome to Upticks with Jake Falcon, founder and CEO of Falcon Wealth Advisors. In this podcast, we help high net worth individuals overcome financial complexities. We do this by enhancing financial literacy and discussing topics in a language free from industry jargon. Join us as we help explain exactly what having a solid financial plan means, as Jake draws from years of experience in helping hundreds of individuals get financially organized and focused on their goals. We hope you find Upticks educational, entertaining, and shareable. Now, on to the show.
Welcome back to the show. This is episode 197, Retiring During Uncertainty. Cory, thank you for joining me while we're on our what seems like never-ending trip down to Tulsa for the PGA Championship. It's been a fun week, though, hasn't it?
Has been a good week. Been a lot of golf and a lot of wind.
A lot of golf and wind. We're both recording this from the beautiful historic Mayo Hotel in downtown Tulsa. Separate rooms, but it's been fun. So has there been anything about the PGA Championship that has surprised you that you didn't know about golf or tournaments or anything just in general? Or no?
I think what probably surprised me the most is how much interest there is actually truly in the practice rounds that the golfers play. Like the fact that they're quite literally they're just practicing at their own pace, but those days become an event in and of themselves.
Right. We were out there Wednesday, right? And it was, were we out there Wednesday together? This
We were
days
out there
all blur
Monday.
together. Monday, but did you go out Wednesday? You didn't.
I did not.
So Wednesday was interesting because it was maybe 2/3 as crowded as Thursday, believe it or not. So Monday wasn't as crowded when you and I were out there. Yes, there was a lot of people there, but Wednesday almost felt like Thursday's round. That's
Like
how many
tournament
people.
day. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're right. And you know what? One thing that I was a little bit intrigued by, and I'm not discounting these guys' talent, but to me, it's no wonder they're so good because they literally are out there 10 or 12 hours a day during these practice rounds. And, I go and maybe practice or hit balls for 30 minutes or an hour, and then I go out there and expect to be good. I mean, these guys are grinding on it constantly.
Professionals.
Yeah,
That's what
all
they've
day
gotta do.
long. Hit shot after shot after shot after shot. So it's pretty cool. And it's been fun. So as of the airing of this show, the tournament will long be over, but it's been a good week. I highly recommend it if anyone out there is a golf fan, even a casual golf fan. I think there's some casual golf fans out there too. It's kind of cool. You get to walk around on a beautiful golf course, get to see some famous people, hit some good golf shots. It's been a good time. It's been a good time. But for today's topic, I had a really good question from a client recently, Cory, that I wanted to address on a podcast because I'm sure he's not the only one thinking about this, and he's approaching retirement, and times are certainly very uncertain with the world, right? We're on the tail end of a pandemic. We've got a war, Russia and Ukraine. Inflation is getting a little out of control. The market has certainly been wacky lately. And so, he pinged me and said, hey, I'm getting ready to retire, but with all this uncertainty going on, I'm kind of having second thoughts. And so I wanted to give some kind of tips or some things for people to think about as they lead up to retirement, because I get it. It's a very valid question and a question that I've heard many times because there's been many times of uncertainty. But first, Cory, before we dive into it, I want to hear one of your tips. We'll kind of go back and forth here. I want to, I listened to this podcast the other day and I wanted to make it clear that first off, we're never going to talk somebody into retiring. That is a very personal and financial decision. You and our team and myself, we're really good at crunching the numbers and being able to tell someone if they can financially afford it. I am not, even though I've done it a lot, I'm not fully trained to tell you psychologically if you're ready for it. There are retirement life coaches for that. And I listened to this good podcast and they talked about how they've done studies that people that are unhappy prior to retirement remain unhappy in retirement, which I don't want to discourage people or make them feel like, oh, darn it, I was hoping that once I retire, I would be happier. That hasn't been proven the case. You've got to find happiness from within, regardless of your life circumstance. And so don't think that by clicking that button of retirement, that you're all of a sudden going to be sunshine and rainbows. Everything's going to be wonderful and you're going to be this happy happy-go-lucky person, because it's not always the case. Now, there are different examples. Maybe you have a boss that's a jerk, or your work environment is unsafe or toxic. That could probably influence your happiness a little bit. But just generally speaking, retirement alone is not going to make you happy. So don't think that it will. Cory, do you want to add anything on that?
No, I think it's a really good point, though. And I'm glad that you brought that up. In fact, I had a good conversation with a client here yesterday about sort of this same topic. But for him, he was thinking about, how do I sort of, ease into retirement, where he's going to slowly kind of just wind down what it is that he's doing with his career, instead of just going, full speed, and then it breaks and then they're retired and you're done. And then it's like, okay, how much golf can I play? How much traveling can I do? Right. It's because it is a big shift for people. So I think understanding what works for you is important, but I'm glad you make the point that if it's probably not appropriate to have the expectation, if you're terribly unhappy in your job, that when you retire, it's going to fix everything. It might fix some things, but it's probably not going to fix everything.
Right. Very good point. Very good. Okay, so good. So let's get into our tips. So what I like to, coach clients on is like, okay, you're right. There's a lot of things that are uncertain and scary out there. And most of that stuff's out of our control. So what I like to do is bring the client back in and say, okay, what are things that we do have control over to help alleviate some of this concern or this fear of retirement? And number one that I wanted to go over today is healthcare, right? So healthcare is not necessarily your personal health, although you can influence your personal health. What I'm talking about, though, is making sure you have proper coverage to continue to be able to take care of yourself. So if you're not 65 and you're retiring, so what are you going to do for health insurance? Are you going to be able to do COBRA, which typically lasts 18 months? So you could use your old employer's health coverage. You typically have to pay a little bit more. And if you're younger than that, let's say you're 50 years old, what are you going to do to make sure you have that health insurance covered so that you're not worried about that in retirement? The worst thing you want to do is retire, get sick, and not have good health insurance. And then you're really putting your retirement nest egg at risk at that point. So typically we'll guide them to a health insurance agent to help figure that out. We'll talk about COBRA, we'll talk about Medicare, right? Just to make sure that they have a plan in place to have proper coverage when they leave active employment with their current full-time employer. So to me, that helps alleviate a lot of fears and concerns with retirement when you've got wars and pandemics and market crashes and inflation and all this other stuff going on. Okay, well, you know what, Jake? I've got good health insurance. My financial plan supports it. I can afford it. So I know at least my health is going to be taken care of, right? So I think that's a very powerful tip, number one. And maybe I took yours from you, Cory, but again, I think that's very important. You got to have your health insurance lined up. Make sure you've got a plan for that. Make sure you can afford it, and it's built in the plan. And we can do all of that. We can do all of that modeling for you. Cory, what's tip number two? You got another tip for me?
Yeah, tip number two is to understand what your expenses look like, and subsequently what your portfolio withdrawals or distributions are going to look like, so you can ensure that your investments are aligned properly. So you have enough money available to you to take distributions regardless of what's occurring in the stock market.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is huge. Cash flow, because ultimately, if you have enough money in bonds generating interest or stocks paying dividends, you can weather these temporary market cycles where we might enter a bear market, right? Or things might get a little shaky with your equity side of your portfolio. So making sure you've got a good understanding of what your core expenses and even maybe your travel expenses, right? Whatever it is, and then make sure your portfolio can handle that cash flow so that you don't have to worry about selling stocks in a down market to fund your retirement lifestyle. So again, you want to make sure that cash flow is in place. Maybe you turn on Social Security earlier than you thought, right? Because that'll help support that cash flow because the market's down. So some other things that we can do to make sure that that income is set up. Good one. A third one then, my third tip for you is kind of leads into that a little bit. It doesn't have to do with cash flow as much, but you want to make sure, and I kind of alluded to this, you want to make sure that you don't have to pull from equities, frankly, anytime in your retirement. And what we typically do is we leave a buffer of at least 5 to and ideally 10 years worth of income not in the stock market. And we do this for market cycles like this year. So all of our clients that are retired, most all of them that are retired, I shouldn't say that in general statement, but for 2022, most of our clients are living off of their income from their bonds, income from their dividends. And if they need to pull a little bit from their account because the income's not quite enough, we're typically pulling from a treasury bond or something that hopefully isn't down much at all in there, or a bond that maybe is maturing. So again, we want to make sure that that short-term cash flow is not tied to a long-term investment like an equity or stock. Good. You got a fourth tip?
First, let me just add something real quick to that,
Sure.
Jake, just so our clients know. So I think what we're talking about conceptually, people understand and it makes sense. But I think as we're reviewing with clients, and so they know, we have wonderful technology that we use for financial planning, for performance reporting, et cetera. And I found in our performance reporting software that there are some great reports that you can run on fixed income or bonds specifically. And I've been having conversations with clients about this recently because you talked about bonds maturing. It's been helpful for people to understand, okay, I have $100,000 in bonds that is set to mature in the next 12 months. I have $200,000 in bonds set to mature in the next 12 to 36 months, and so on and so forth. But we have all of that broken down and can help clients understand exactly what their bond ladder looks like, the income those bonds are generating, and when they're going to mature, so when they can expect to receive that principal back.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah. So again, lean on us. So if you're a current client of Falcon Wealth Advisors and you want to do a more thorough analysis of your fixed income, good point, Cory. We can pull that up on our dashboard and go over that with you. And certainly our team of financial planners and traders can run a report and even send it over to you.
Yep.
Good. You have another tip?
Yeah. The fourth tip, I think, around retiring during uncertainty and just when to retire, more broadly speaking, it's really important to have a vision of what retirement's going to actually look like. This might be more on the softer side, and it doesn't pertain as much to the financial piece specifically. But Jake, you and I have talked about this. We've talked with clients about this too, of course, a number of times over the years where, if you're waking up on Tuesday morning and it's 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning and you're not going to work, how are you spending your time? Kind of going back to what I was talking about earlier, like you can play golf, you can travel, you can spend time with grandkids, but that's probably not going to fill all week, every week for all of your retirement. So having a vision around what it is that's important to you and how you want to spend your time when you're not working anymore helps to set someone up for a more successful or maybe a happier retirement.
Right. Good. And so again, and leading into that, this will be our last tip, is that you want to understand, and we've talked about this before, that there's typically 3 phases to retirement. You've got your go-go years, your slow-go years, and your no-go years. And hopefully we're planning for a 30-year retirement cycle. And you have to realize in those 30 years, you're going to have bad markets and you're going to have good markets. You're going to have a lot of times of uncertainty. And so, yeah, it's unfortunate that if you want to retire and the market's down 20%, that is tough to do that in that year. But as long as you have that cash flow and some of these other items and these tips that you and I have spoken about, Cory, it's okay. Because what happens when 10 years from now, you're already into retirement and we have another, are you going to go back to work? No, right? Most of our clients don't. And again, it's because we have all of these other boxes checked and we're allowing for them, right? But it is, and this is one thing that's very important though, you can do permanent damage if your portfolio is not set up correctly and you draw down your equities during a bear market to live off of. Yes, that is a big problem. They call that sequence of return risk. But again, we look to avoid that by having a proper allocation in cash and bonds and dividends and even options for certain clients that are approved for that. So again, there's things that you can do to set yourself up and certainly during your entire retirement cycle so that you don't have to worry about these uncertain times. I don't want somebody calling me up or you, Cory, or Sam saying, the Dow's down 500 points, Jake, can I still go on this cruise? Right? That should not dictate if you go on a cruise or not. And if so, shame on us for maybe not explaining that to you well enough. And that's, again, one of the points of this show is that we're not banking the market going up or down on any given day on whether you can achieve your goals. The equities are for a long-term growth. and the bonds and cash are for short-term liquidity needs. And even the bonds are down a little bit, but again, they're paying interest. Like you mentioned, they've got a schedule where they mature. And so again, my point is recognize that there's going to be bad markets in your retirement. And if one so happens to happen right when you retire, that's okay too. The last thing I want is a client working for 5 or 10 more years just because of the market. And now what's going to happen is they're going to miss their go-go years. Right. And so that's why we set up clients pretty early on. When you say, Cory, like even in their 40s, sometimes we start building that bond bucket for them so that it doesn't really matter when they retire because we've got that income allocated for. And so it's important. But again, you don't want to go at this alone. You can do some permanent damage to your portfolio. This is why you and I have jobs as wealth advisors, that it's very critical that you understand where you're going to pull capital from to live. And that you don't make a mistake. That's good.
Very well said. Yep. And I think we can, with the planning, of course, we can help clients understand how it all affects them specifically, right? And we can talk through that. But the truth is, to your point, Jake, that we cannot control the market conditions at any given time, but we can control how much planning goes into someone's retirement. So hopefully they find themselves in the position where the market conditions don't dictate whether or not they can retire. But I found it real interesting. I just want to add one quick thing. I read a story in the Wall Street Journal this week that talked about, we're all familiar now with this term of the Great Resignation, right? Of people that have left their jobs in the midst of the pandemic. Wall Street Journal just published an article that they called the Great Unretirement, which was basically people that have retired in the last year or two are coming back into the workforce. And I think part of the thesis there is that if people don't have a financial plan that they feel confident in as far as retirement goes, a year ago, for example, if people account balances were up, things looked really good, they felt comfortable retiring, market conditions have changed, and now they don't feel so comfortable. With an appropriate plan in place, those market conditions shouldn't drive whether or not someone needs to go back to work. But I would imagine a lot of those people that are coming out of retirement back to work, there may not have been enough planning that was done on the front end to make sure that they could stay retired, assuming that's what they wanted.
Right. Good point. And if our clients go back to work, we want them to do it because they want to, not because they have to. I have a lot of clients that work in retirement, but again, they're doing it out of for social and health and reasons, not necessarily the financial gain that they're getting from it.
Yep.
So good point. Yeah, good point. So thank you again for joining me on the show, Cory. I know that's all the time that we do have this morning. You're about to head back out to the course, aren't you?
That's right.
So again, this is going to air, so we can laugh at it later. But who are you? Rory McIlroy's leading after round one. Do you have a pick? You have a pick? Who's going to win?
Yeah, it's probably a cop-out to say Rory, but I'm going to say that. And it's only, Jake, because your wife, Rachel, and my wife, Cassie, arrived yesterday, and Rachel was reading me some stats about the PGA Championship and how frequently the person who wins is also the winner after the first day. And it was a pretty high percentage.
Yeah, she told me that too last night. So it'll be interesting. I'll tell you this much. It's been made apparent to me that driving the golf ball at Southern Hills is very important because I've been very fortunate. I'm doing this walking score, and I know you got to go, but this walking score where I get to follow a group inside the ropes. And I followed this guy, Lucas Herbert, yesterday from Australia. Super nice guy, by the way. But the other guys in his group weren't as long as him, and they were not hitting driver nearly as often as he was. I mean, and Cory, on some of these holes, I mean, he was 50, 60 yards past them, which is a completely different golf course when even if you're in the rough, you're hitting it such a shorter iron into these very tough greens and green complexes. And he beat them both pretty easily. I mean, they weren't even in the same realm as this guy. Now, maybe he's more talented, just generally speaking, but I think that's why Rory's leading. They were talking about how well he drove the golf ball, and he's played a different golf course than a lot of those other guys. And I think that's why he's got a good chance. I think if his approach shots and his putting holds up, he's got a great chance to win. But, there's some other guys up there. Tom Hoagie's up there. Justin Thomas is up there. So it should be a fun weekend. Hopefully the weather cooperates. And like I said, I know you got to run. But so thank you all for tuning in. Cory, you got your own show, In the Money Insights, on YouTube, podcast, Cory at FalconWealthAdvisors.com. My email is Jake at FalconWealthAdvisors.com. Thank you all for joining, and we hope you have a great week. Thank you, Cory.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Upticks. Click the subscribe button to be notified when new episodes become available. Also, be sure to visit our website, falconwealthadvisors.com, and click the Contact Us button if you'd like to meet with Jake and his team.